Hey guys, welcome back to an interesting video on Wild Rift. So here we're finally back with a tier list for patch 5.0c. Now we haven't done this in quite a number of patches. I believe since 5.0 we haven't really done a tier list. Quite a number of things changed, but kind of not that much changed either. We've also haven't really been doing patch note breakdowns for a very long time. As I explained, it's mainly because on the days that the patches release, I'm kind of out the entire day from early morning till late night, so didn't really want to make it the next day because I didn't really feel that there was a point since there are so many videos on patch notes by then. But anyways, let's jump straight into talking about the tier list. So honestly, you can see top lane. Alright, first things first is Kindred obviously isn't in the tier list because she hasn't been released yet. Still a week plus for Kindred's release. Secondly, Wukong hasn't gotten his rework yet. So this is still kind of based off of the old Wukong, but I do think that most likely Wukong will be getting better. Probably Wukong will be like S plus tier when he's reworked, but of course we don't really know that. So majority of the top part of the tier list remains the same. I still think, of course, with the Heartsteel tank meta, obviously the best champions are still going to be Set and Sion. Garen is also really strong. Gwen, just because it's a tank meta, does very, very well because she's allowed to freely scale and she can shred tanks in the mid to late game. Mundo is someone that I underestimated. I originally put him at the bottom of the S tier in my previous tier list, but actually after playing against Mundo so many times, honestly, he does insane amounts of damage if he can reach you, and he's also really, really difficult to kill. So actually, ironically, Mundo can actually carry a game by himself if he gets really, really fed. But of course, you always sometimes run into certain champions where you can get kited extremely easily. Like for example, Aurelion Sol. Like Mundo is never gonna reach Aurelion Sol. He's just gonna get permanently kited. Things like that. So of course, Mundo does have his weaknesses, but I think in general he is very strong. Of course, as I mentioned, Wukong I still think is very strong, but I think we'll be getting better. Ornn really strong as well. And then we have a couple of like anti-tank champions like Fiora and Camille do true damage, and they are able to basically split push while the tanks are with their team. Of course, Sion is probably the best split pusher in the game, but if you have, let's say, a Set most likely is going to be joining his team, or Mundo is going to be joining his team, so this allows you to then get off a split push. And then we have a bevy of just really strong champions in general, like like your Aatrox, Renekton, Jax, Riven, etc. And I have moved down Shen and Volibear because although they are Heartsteel users, I expected them to be a little bit stronger than what they are. I think after people initially pick them quite often in like patch 5.0, like as the patches go on, they get picked less and less and they're falling back into obscurity. I still think that they are pretty good, especially Volibear. I still think has the potential to be really good. But honestly, they don't really compare to the other Heartsteel champions or the other just champions in the top lane in general. So I really don't think that they're all that good. But with the top lane kind of covered, let's talk about the jungle. So for the jungle, the main change here is the addition of Talon. And you can see that the top 5 junglers are basically all assassins. It's kind of like assassin meta in the jungle at the moment. Because basically, it's a tank meta in the top lane. So the jungle meta is kind of straightforward, which is basically Lee Sin, Kayn, Kha'Zix, Talon, Evelynn, they're all just assassins. Like, they're all strong at different points in the game. Like, Lee Sin is strong like the moment the game starts. Kayn needs to get form in about 5 minutes to be strong. Kha'Zix needs level 5 to be strong, and Talon is kind of strong more or less throughout the game, but really gets strong at level 5. Evelynn also needs level 5 to be strong. So they all have different points in the game where they get strong, but the kind of main theme here is that all 5 of them are assassins, so they just go to mid or bot lane to assassinate, and that's like kind of just the way the jungle meta is at the moment. They all do insane amounts of damage, and most of them are not that difficult to play. Although, of course, each of them are really unique in terms of how they want to play. Like Lee Sin's a very highly mechanical champion. Kayn, you have to kind of have the extra mechanic of getting his form and getting stacks, and Kha'Zix, of course, you have your isolation passive. Talon has all of those wall hops and unique gank angles, and Evelynn, of course, has to play around her invisibility. All of them have unique mechanics, but either which way you want to just assassinate someone, essentially, and that's the name of the game. Aside from that, there are a lot of junglers that are very strong. Like the S tier is packed, with a lot of junglers. Of course, Hecarim, whether you build him damage or tank Hecarim is better, really strong. Same goes for like the Jarvan and Vi. You can build them full lethality to one-shot people and play them as assassins as well, or you can also build them tank. Olaf is a really underrated champion that I think is actually very very strong after he got his ulti rework and things like that. Of course, Gwen, not the best jungler, but really good into the tank meta. Volibear, very strong early game champion. Of course, same with Pantheon, but Wukong, again, his rework is not quite here yet, so can't really talk too much about that. Now, lately I've been seeing Xin Zhao on the rise, mainly because you start off with a Youmuu's, and with Xin Zhao being one of the strongest early game champions, early game junglers, you can actually start to snowball. I've had many games where Xin Zhao just, gets like more than 1 kill per minute and just snowballs the game out of control, and you just get assassinated by him non-stop, despite the fact that he's not even building lethality. He's gonna go like, he's gonna go for like your Youmuu's into something like Triforce and Sterix, things like that. But with the starting Youmuu's, he gets so much damage that he just easily kills you. Now, Mundo, I think his jungle care is honestly pretty bad, but just because of how tanky and strong he is, I actually moved him up to the top of A tier in my jungle tier list. So he is kind of not too bad, but it's not the best in the jungle either. Neela, her best role is actually in the jungle, is better than if you're playing her ADC. So most of the top Neelas are actually junglers. You take for a strike, you go in and just try to burst someone down instantly. Kind of plays a little bit like an assassin herself, but scales super duper well into the late game, where you can be basically a secondary melee carry. Now, honestly, the rest of the jungle tier list kind of remains the same. The A tier junglers and all they are still good, but I just think that there are better versions of a lot of these junglers. Like, for example, I think Neela is just a better better version of Graves. Like, it's just kind of superior in that sense. And like Jarvan and Vi are like better forms of Nunu, for instance. So things like that. And then of course the BC and D tier jungle is just not very advisable to pick, basically. Of course, Master Yi does really well in low elo where people can't CC him properly. But yeah, that's about it for jungle tier list. Let's talk about the mid lane tier list. So let's just start off first by talking about Talon. So you can see I put Talon at the top of the A+ tier. I don't think he's really that good in the mid lane, because I think one of the main strengths of Talon is when you play him in the jungle, number one, your clear is insane, even though they just nerfed his clear in the latest patch. But I think that the main thing about Talon is he rotates very fast around the map because of his wall jumps. Of course, you can still do that in mid to rotate and gank out of the lanes, but I think that probably the biggest strength you lose out when you're playing him mid is when you ulti and you're invisible, you can come in from the side and enemies don't even know you're there, and you can kill them before they even realize you're actually there. So I think that's one of the biggest strengths of Talon, that in mid lane you kind of don't really get to use this strength as much as if you were in the jungle. Of course, you can do this in the mid and late stages of the game a lot more easily than when you're in lane, but I think you lose out a lot of strength when you're playing mid, and also in like the lane itself. He's a melee champion, so he has really hard time clearing wave. He takes a lot of abuse from ranged champions, things like that. So I don't think he's the best laner, but he's a really good jungler. So looking at the rest of the tier list, of course we start from the X+ tier. I still believe that Syndra is the best mid laner. Of course, she has been taken down a notch, but she's still really, really powerful. Her early game damage is insane. She scales really well. Her mid and late game damage is insane as well. Vladimir, I still think is very strong as well. If you know how to play him properly and use your movement speed, like your Ghost, your Phase Rush, your Cosmic Drive, your Pool especially, you can do so much damage and stay safe at the same time. The only weakness is that his early game is pretty weak. He kind of needs a little bit to scale into mid game. Then you have like Zed, Akali, and Zoe, the champions that when you're good at them, you can just kill people very easily. And honestly, I think that the Wind Brothers are also kind of S+ tier, but I didn't want to put too many champions in the S+ tier. As we talked about in one of my tier list videos, I'm trying to limit the S+ tier to 5 the best I can. So I think that the Wind Brothers are also really strong. And if you don't think so, it's probably because you have a lot of people who are either in your team or the enemy team who don't know how to play him properly. When you start encountering those, people who play Yasuo and Yone properly, it's not that there's no counterplay, but it's so difficult to play against them. Like, they are really, really strong. So yeah, and again, same as the jungle, in the mid lane there are a lot of very strong champions. You can see the S tier is clogged with, just a lot of picks. There are really a ton of strong picks. Same for the A+ tier. Of course, the A tier champions are still alright, but anything below the A tier, I think really are not too advisable, considering how many good champions there are that you can pick. I actually forgot to shift Aurelion Sol up. Aurelion Sol, after he got like that round of buffs, not C tier anymore. Definitely, I would put him maybe at somewhere near the bottom of S plus tier. Of course, not S plus tier, S tier. Maybe like after Kassadin, because he is really strong, but he also needs time to scale. His early game is really weak. However, when he gets a couple of items, he gets his Rylai's into his next like two items or so. Like when he gets his Death Cap. And stuff, he does start to do a lot of damage, but I think it's again, you need to kind of scale. It's a little bit hard to execute Aura than Soul. Yeah, so he's alright, but not that good. Anyways, with that, let's finally talk about the ADCs. Okay, so tons and tons of changes in my main role, in my opinion. The thing that hasn't changed with is that I still think Kai'Sa, Tristana, and Ezreal are the best champions. Now, if you guys don't think so, I think it's because Kai'Sa and Tristana have a very low pick rate, at least when I'm playing. Like, I don't see a lot of Kai'Sas and a lot of Tristanas, but I think that they're actually very strong now. It could be because Kai'Sa and Tristana are a little bit harder champions to play. Now, I say that they're hard. They're not as hard as like Draven or something, but I actually think Tristana is relatively difficult to play in Wild Rift because of your bomb placement and things like that. I don't see a lot of Kai'Sas and Tristanas, but I do think that they're actually very, very strong. Tristana, of course, very strong in the early game. Snowball's really, really hard. And Kai'Sa, of course, very strong when he gets to mid and late game. In lane, not really the best unless your enemy doesn't play well. But Ezreal, ever since there are multiple buffs like the Kraken Slayer buff, the Triforce buff, like he is really, really strong. Like Ezreal does more damage than Draven at level 1 because he can auto Q and just DPS an insane amount. So Ezreal really strong like level 1. Early game is pretty decent as well. After he gets since he has Kraken Slayer rune, he has a really decent early game. I would even say it's pretty strong. And then he does very well in all stages of the game. Of course, the main weakness of Ezreal, he's not really a hyper carry. He doesn't really have wave clear, so that's kind of just a weakness. And of course, I have to put Samira at the bottom of the S plus tier. Now, the reason why I put her there is because there is a lot of counterplay to Samira. She gets CC'd by anything, she's basically useless. But at the same time, as a Samira player, you can play around CC, you can get a QSS, and you just do insane amounts of damage. If I can, I'm going to be making a Samira video to kind of just show you how powerful she is after getting so many rounds of buffs. She's really strong now. And yeah. So Varus, you guys have been seeing me make tons of content for Varus. He's so flexible. He can play so many different builds. He can be played, of course, in the ADC role and in mid lane as well. You guys have seen a couple of my Varus mid videos. And if you really want to play him in other lanes, he can technically be played in any role. Like Varus top is I have seen it being played. I have seen Varus support as well because he does have, of course, the CC from his ulti. I've even seen Varus jungle on the Chinese server in one of the videos. I don't know why, I don't know how, but yeah. But Varus is really strong, really flexible. He has like 10 viable builds. I'm not sure if it's literally 10, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is like 10 viable builds at one time. So Caitlyn and Xayah, both just really strong champions. Caitlyn, of course, huge lane bully and just abuses her range. Xayah gets a lot of safety and has to force her opponent to play around her feathers, which is some people don't do and they just perish, or some people do and it's just irritating to play against. Lucian actually moving up like 2 whole tiers from A to S, because Lucian has gotten so many buffs and his items have also gotten buffed. Items like he can build Triforce now. Items like Charge Blade, for example. Yeah, he's actually now in a pretty decent spot. Not amazing like S plus tier material, but he's not as bad as the A plus tier champions. He's actually better than them in my opinion. So of course he is really hard to execute because of his low range, but I do think he's actually a very strong champion. So in the A plus tier, you mostly have not mostly, but you have a couple of the other hyper carries that I think are not as good as Tristana and Kai'Sa. So you have like Jinx, you have Sivir, you have Zeri. I still think that these champions are very strong. Don't forget, A plus tier is still a lot of strong. It's still very good. Very good champions. And Jhin is also there as well. Pretty decent damage, decent utility. Ashe at this point with going for Kraken Slayer, also decent damage and decent utility as well. Of course, Draven will always be good if you're good at him. But honestly, I feel that Draven is that kind of champion where he can never be too powerful that he's broken, because if that's the case, people who are Draven mains will just stomp everybody. So he has to be at a power level that he's strong for people who are good at him, but he's not strong if you're not good at him. And I feel like that means that he will never really be S plus tier, simply due to the fact that other champions might have better like numbers and better stats than him. So if you execute other champions just as well as execute Draven, they're gonna outperform Draven. But of course, if you're an insane Draven player, Draven will always be good for you. So I think Draven is always gonna be like an A+ to S tier champion kind of range, depending on meta and things like that. So I think the worst hyper carry at the moment is actually Twitch. Whether you build the new build you just saw me go for a couple of days ago, or whatever other build, I just think that every other hyper carry is kind of superior to Twitch because he's just so squishy. And yes, he does have a lot of strengths, like his bonus range on the ulti, like his poison, the spread damage, invisibility being the biggest plus point you have on Twitch. But I just think that other champions are just better at the moment. Vayne is also just not very good. Like of course, you do want to pick her into teams that are very tanky, but as I said, generally you have an assassin meta in the jungle. You don't really pick tanks on mid lane, so most of the time, at most, you let's say have a Mundo or a Set in the top lane, and at most you're going to have some support that's a tank, like let's say a Leona, a Thresh, something like that. So you rarely have Vayne value, if you want to put it that way. And if you pick Vayne against, like let's say, only one Set, then you might as well just pick like other ADCs that are just way stronger than Vayne, and just try to carry by killing other champions that's not the Set, rather than you pick Vayne to focus the Set. So anyways, Nyla, as I said, a lot stronger in the jungle. MF, honestly, it's kind of decent. It's kind of like the worst ADC here, except for like farming Senna, which we all know is always going to be the worst ADC, more or less. But honestly, I think she's actually pretty alright. Like, she goes for a full lethality build now, and she actually does decent damage in the early game. But of course, it's just really hard to play her because she has no mobility, and it's really hard to get a long channel of your ulti onto anybody. But yeah, so that's basically it for ADCs. Now let's talk a little bit more about supports. Okay, so last but not least, we have supports. Now, I have made a couple of changes. I still think the best supports are still gonna be the Karma, the Pyke, and the Lux, mainly because they kind of can carry the game by themselves in the sense that they can do the damage by themselves, and they're also supportive for their team, like Karma and Lux with the shield, and Pyke just getting a lot of picks for the team and sharing the goal with his team. Then I think that the two next best supports are the two enchanters, Lulu and Soraka. Now, Soraka's healing has always been insane since her rework, and I actually think I moved Lulu up because I've been playing against Lulu a lot, and I actually think Lulu is a lot stronger than people think. It's just that after she got unnerved a couple of times in the past, people kind of just stopped picking her, but in reality, I still think that she's very, very strong. She's just she just has a bit of a low pick rate. So, Rakan, I think, is the best engager support, as you guys know. I think he's just pretty strong in general, and I've actually put Seraphine as the second best champion in the S tier, and this is actually because I think Seraphine, a lot like Lulu, is very underrated and very underplayed, and most people cannot play her correctly. Now, what do I mean by correctly? Her shielding and like her cooldowns on her W has been buffed a number of times. And basically, the way you play Seraphine is you want to build her supportive and you want to max your W. The amount of shielding you get from double casting the W, and the healing as well from the double cast W, is completely bonkers. And it kind of is really like a lot like comparable to like your Lux, Lulu, and Soraka. The only reason I'm not putting her in the S+ tier is because of how rarely I see her. I'm not completely sure that she is like S+ tier, but I think that sooner or later people will pick up on Seraphine. I think that Seraphine will be one of the top supports sooner or later when people kind of learn how to play her and get her to be popular. So next, we have the usual suspects. Yuumi, really good with hyper carries, especially if you're doing. Nami, just a really strong champion. Senna, of course, really strong champion, especially if you want to carry yourself, if you want to go damage. But of course, utility, probably better most of the time. And we have a new addition to the S tier, which is going to be Leona. Now, honestly, as you guys can see here, the kind of meta at the moment is a very enchanter based, and tank champions are not really as that strong into an enchanter meta because they can get peeled very easily. They're really hard for them to find catches. But honestly, between all of the tank champions now, I actually think Leona is actually the best, which is something that I found quite surprising because I have always thought that Nautilus is better than Leona, or Thresh is better than Leona, things like that. However, now I think one of the main problems with playing against enchanter lanes is, like with champions like Nautilus, Alistar, or Thresh, the enemy team generally never is in a position that they get engaged on because your hook can be blocked by minions. So it's really difficult as like a Nautilus or Alistar to get it engaged, but Leona has ability to engage, multiple ways. So firstly, her ult is longer range than Nautilus, so she can ult to engage and then just chain CC with her E and her Q. Number two is her E range has been buffed multiple times. Like I think at least 3 times her her E range has been buffed, and it goes through minions. So because of that, Leona can actually hard engage through the minions and find picks for her team. So I actually think Leona is actually really good now compared to the other engagers. So I moved her to the bottom of S tier just to kind of reflect that. And the rest of the tier list remains relatively the same. Of course, like other champions like Braum, for example, has gone a number of buffs in the latest patch, but I don't think they're all too significant. And yeah, that's pretty much it for our tier list. So thank you guys so much for watching the video, and goodbye.